So, as you know, first we covered the whole story arc and the 5 key points: inciting incident, plot point 1, middle, plot point 2, and climax from a high level so you can see. So if you haven't seen that, maybe go back and watch that video. Then we did the inciting incident and plot point 1. So today we're talking about the middle. And the middle is often really difficult for a writer. It's where the story tends to lag. So we see as editors, quite often that's where the piece of the book between plot point 1 and plot point 2 needs the most help. And it's also the biggest portion, right? It's 50% of the book. Up to plot point 1, we're at 25%, and at 75%, we're plot point 2 and forward. So it's 50% of your book. So it's kind of important.
Maybe. So it's this 50%, the middle of our story. What are the key factors to make this strong and engaging?
So if you remember, with the inciting incident, there was something in the protagonist's ordinary world that changed.
Correct.
Plot point 1 is the bigger event that the protagonist can't return from. So they're on a forward trajectory. And between plot point 1 and the middle, they're basically still reacting to things. So stuff is happening around them, and they are going, oh, that happened, I have to do this. That happened, I have to do this. There's a lot of decisions made. There's a lot of action, some good, some bad. So emotional arc up and down to get to the middle. And in the middle is really where the protagonist decides to take control, and they're going to drive the story. So instead of reacting to events, they're going to cause events. And a lot of those things they cause are going to be a disaster. And so by the time they get to plot point 2, it's bad. So they've done a lot of stuff. They're trying to reach their goal, but they're causing stuff to happen. And so that's the big trick around the midpoint, is to make sure the protagonist is growing, and they've now decided they're going to move forward.
Okay. So they're creating disasters in their lives. I was following along this. And so how do we use this? How do we make this effective? So I'm guessing we need to have a certain amount of disaster creation and other things are going on there. So walk us through it.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a really specific method to figure out the middle on why it's lagging.
Okay.
So if a writer looks at every scene, and at the start of the scene, whether the protagonist is in it or not, doesn't matter. At the start of the scene, what's the emotional state of the protagonist? And at the end of the scene, what's their emotional state? And did it change from a positive state to a negative state, or a negative to a positive? And so if they're not in the scene, I just edited a World War I book. And so, Allies versus the Germans. And the protagonist is an ally. And in the German scenes, if something happened there that would make the protagonist's life easier, I put a plus for the protagonist in that scene. If something happened that made his life worse, I put a negative. So you can see through your whole story the emotional character arc of the protagonist, whether they're in the scene or not. And the reason this is important, particularly in the middle, what I see is that it's neutral. And so there's a lot of scenes where stuff is happening and you think, guy was happy here, guy was happy here. Or, it's a female protagonist and she was sad here, sad here. And so whether it's beginning or the end, there's no emotional change. And that's where the lull happens. Right?
Because they have to be humans. We have to engage with them. We have to empathize, right?
Yeah. So for Pitfalls, in the middle, the actual midpoint scene where something happens that triggers your protagonist to be proactive, the protagonist has to be in the scene, right? It has to be an active scene.
Okay.
You want to link it back to your blurb. Is it related to the overall goal of the story? And it must be related to the overall goal of the story and of the protagonist, right? So all of those things have to happen, just like the inciting incident in plot point 1. So if we look at Gone Girl, and we look at the midpoint of the story, so the inciting incident, Nick comes home, finds Amy missing, blood in the kitchen. So plot point 1, Nick finds a clue that Amy has left. And this is a trigger to him that he knows she's up to something and he has to follow it. He can't not, because he'll be in trouble with the police. And so he's got to do it. So by the midpoint, Nick has been reacting to all these things Amy has been throwing at him and chasing things around, and he's kind of, looping. And so in the midpoint, he's looking, by this point, he's looking like the bad guy in the press. Everybody assumes, well, of course he's killed her. He's the husband. That's what's happened. So he gives a press conference to improve his image. So he's got all these things he wants to say, and so people get to know him. He's not the bad guy. But at the press conference, there's a woman who's up, who's Amy's secret best friend, who he doesn't even know about. So she
Right.
shows up and demands to know what he did with Amy and really goes hard on the attack. So now he's getting pressured from Amy, and now the public is really going after him. So his press conference fails, and he has to get proactive to save himself. He just has to do it, or, all signs are leading to him like he's killed her.
Right. Right. Okay, so those are our pitfalls, and we're trying to find out to make sure that we're doing that way. So we're going back into our homework. Today is going back to our blurb, matching it up, making sure we're having those. I like the plus minus. I really like taking a look of, are we transitioning our emotions? Are we going on that roller coaster ride? Because a roller coaster that just goes straight across or just one big dip down is not really exciting. It's back to that EKG, be alive, not flatline dead. So that's always good. That's really, really good. And I think that's good for self-editing and for the editors. So absolutely, let's check it out. We'll be back next week after the middle and into plot point 2. So again, thanks for joining us. We hope that you will share and all of this information out there, join, subscribe, follow along. And if you have any particular questions, please drop us an email. We'll be glad to speak directly to those. All right.